seen and heard, it is all about global governance. As a matter of fact, the end of April, I was in Mexico City at a meeting where the United Nations is designing a global tax. You hearing about that in the newspapers? No. After I attended the first meeting, the United Nations said, you are not sanctioned to be here and you will not be invited to future meetings. And so they want only those who agree with their agenda to attend their meetings. I think that that's enough reason for us to get out of the UN, throw the building into the East River, tell them to get out of the UN. So with that introduction, let's look at what is Agenda 21. How does it fit into this global governance that is being designed? And I can tell you, I truly believe that with the United Nations already having an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch, the executive are appointed bureaucrats and elected by officials, as Ban Ki-moon is now the UN Secretary General. The legislative branch would be those bureaucrats that meet at meetings around the globe in places like Nairobi, Kenya, or in Rome, Italy, or in Brussels, Belgium, Bonn, Germany, places around the globe. In New York City alone, there are 7,000 meetings a year. And then the judicial branch is a court that was created in 1998 called the International Criminal Court that could haul each of us into prison, even though the United States has not ratified that treaty. So it has the three branches of government. The only thing it's lacking is a funding source. Right now, we can keep them at bay. Why? Because we have to pay dues. And there have been administrations who have not paid all of the dues and have withdrawn, as Reagan did, from UNESCO, for example. And unfortunately, George W. Bush got us back into UNESCO, and their goal is a global educational system with a global curriculum. And Barack Hussein Obama has now, with Race to the Top, given us a national curriculum, which is based upon on the international curriculum. So all is not good in that arena, but having a global tax is going to be very dangerous, because at that point, I don't know what separates it from being a global government. So Agenda 21 is one part of that. How in the world was that created? Where was it created? When was it created? Well, let's go back to the United Nations holding an Earth Summit in 1972. And the Secretary General of that meeting was a man from Canada. His name is Maurice Strong. His name will be important in a moment. We'll look at another slide of him. 20 years later, in 1992, they held the second Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. There have been other Earth Summits since. In 2002, in Johannesburg, and I did attend that meeting. That's when they rolled out something called an Earth Charter, and we'll see that in just a moment. And then the big enchilada, when they hope to bring the global tax and all of these different treaties together and rewrite at least 500 international treaties and agreements, is planned for next June in Rio de Janeiro. So they're going back to Rio. So with that, let's look at what we know about Maurice Strong, this Canadian. As you can see, this man made a very extreme statement, and it can be called social justice. These are all new words and new phrases for Americans, because we are freedom-loving patriots, but these people are Marxists. And so they are using words that we think that we can reason through and understand what they're saying, but they have foreign definitions. Social justice, what does that mean? Maurice Strong says, current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class. So you see, it's middle class. It's not the affluent upper class, but the middle class that they're targeting, involving high meat intake. We eat meat, so what's wrong with that? Use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. He calls this social justice. One of his best friends is Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev and he worked together on creating this Earth Charter. In 2002, when I was in Johannesburg, they presented the Earth Charter. An artist even created an ark, very eerily similar to the Ark of the Covenant, in order to place this ark and place this Earth Charter. So it's very, very serious what these people are doing, and yet it's being done outside of the American mind and outside of our media, and we're not hearing enough about what their agenda is. Here's another picture of social justice. Last December, and it's every December that the United Nations holds a climate change meeting, and that's what I've been tracking since 1997. At their annual meetings, there was an American college girl who was very proud to be there, working for social justice. And in these 4 points, she defined what she means by social justice. You've seen what Maurice Strong thinks, and here's her way of saying it. Liberate the soil, undam the rivers, free the people, unplug the empire. Who's the empire? We are, United States. So here is a girl who's living high in the hawk, literally, going to Cancun, Mexico, living on the Mexican Riviera. Her parents obviously are affluent enough in order to support her coming and going, and she's saying, unplug the empire. So how does that happen? Totally illogical. But where did we get this terminology, social justice and sustainable development? It came out of a meeting in 1987 and there was a document created called Our Common Future. The head of that meeting was a woman by the name of Mrs. Gro Harlem Brundtland, who is also the vice chairman of the world's socialists. Call them socialists, call them Marxists, same difference. But she said, if the priorities of human society and therefore of human government are to be rewritten, they're making absolutely no secret about their desire to rewrite our governments into a Marxist, socialist, as you would want to call it, government. But sustainable development was first introduced there. Sustainable development, as you see in the top right-hand corner, that is their logo. They bring together 3 ideas: social, economic, and environment. And then they say, we are going to make these sustainable. So you can call it sustainable, or you can call it social justice, environmental justice, economic justice. You can also substitute the word justice for equity. Equity. So everyone gets the same amount of money, everyone gets the same amount of resources, and socially everyone is treated the same. That is, unless you're part of the ruling class. And I saw recently an old tape of a Russian who had fled the USSR before the wall came down. And he was asked, what do you do with these useful idiots? Those who play along, who undermine governments like the United States. What do you do with them? He said, well, first of all, we call them useful idiots, and they're the first ones we kill when we go in. But right now, these people are playing along thinking that they're going to be part of the ruling elite. Do you think that Barack Hussein Obama and his wife go to New York City to enjoy a play in Air Force One on our dime and our time, and he thinks that he is all of a sudden going to be equalized with the lowest common denominator, the poorest on earth? No way. No way. He sees himself as part of the ruling elite. Sustainable development is defined by the United Nations as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That doesn't sound very evil, but how does it work? Well, it is a framework of rules and regulations that limits the behavior of individuals, businesses, and organizations to those activities approved by government. In other words, all of your coming and going, every bit of our government is planned top-down. And you're going to see through this how this kind of planning, economic planning, that was instituted and tried for 70 years in the USSR and failed, is being implemented around the globe. And they're using these treaties in order to do it. So that takes us to the 1992 UN Convention on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro. Out of that meeting in 1992 came 3 major UN treaties. The first was the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. We're going to go through these individually in just a moment. The second, the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the third, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. To combat desertification, as you see, the logo looks like an African acacia tree, the very tree that Noah built the ark from. And it's a lovely landscape, and you think, well, they must be out trying to help people who live in deserts. No, the Israelis, folks, are growing apple trees in the desert, and through drip irrigation are even feeding them salt water. And they're producing lovely fruit. That is what any treaty on desertification ought to be going after. But what was the UN actually going after? The UN has now UN control over natural resources, 70% of the Earth's land. That's what they got out of this treaty. And the United States Senate did ratify the treaty in 2000. My friend who wrote the booklet that I held up a few minutes ago, Henry Lamb, called the United States Senator who offered this on the floor in a package of 34 treaties and said, "What are you thinking?" And he says, "I swear, Henry, I didn't do that. We didn't ratify that treaty. It wasn't in the package." Henry said, "Look again." And the guy looked and he says, "Oh my goodness. The United States Senate did ratify this treaty in 2000. They didn't even know they did it." So you'd think if they were surprised about it, that they would just recall it, right? They haven't done it. What year is this? 2011? And they still haven't done it. And we've had how many years of Republican leadership since that happened? And it hasn't happened. Why not? Because we the people don't know about it. And we the people aren't asking our United States senators who ratified it to unratify it. We need to be talking about these things. I think that there is a U.S. Senate forum going to be held in East Texas coming up with all of our Senate candidates running to replace Kay Bailey Hutchison. That needs to be one of our questions. Will you work to repeal this ratification? Now you know, something that you can ask about. The second was the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. George H.W. Bush was warned before he went to Rio, don't go to Rio. It's going to be a very crazy place. 20,000 people down there. That's how many people go to these annual meetings. Don't go. He went. Why? Because he wanted to sign the climate change treaty. And then he brought it home and he got it through the US Senate the same year in 1992. Why is that important? Mikhail Gorbachev put all the dots together. And Forbes magazine found this recently. And it is this. An environmental crisis, says Gorbachev, will be the key to the New World Order. Who talked about a New World Order in the State of the Union address? George H.W. Bush did. So did he just happen to go down to Rio? No, he was warned against going. He went and he signed the lousy treaty. He brought it home and he rammed it through the US Senate the same year. We are part and parcel of the climate change treaty. Guess where the global tax is being designed? Under the climate change treaty. That's why it's important, folks. And it's going to take eternal vigilance for us to get out of it. After 1992 treaty, then the Kyoto Protocol happened, and that was binding limits on greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the main greenhouse gas emission is CO2, carbon dioxide. That's the air that you and I breathe out. Folks, it's not a pollutant. When fossil fuels are burned, it's not a pollutant. The globe is not warming. Science does not show that it's warming. The whole thing is built on a hoax. There's a scientist who's even recognized by the U.S. Department of Energy and by NASA, who used to work for NASA, that I've met at a meeting in Cancun last December, written 2 books on the topic, most recently just submitted another report that was highly embraced, peer-reviewed. And guess what? He said, you know, it's really amazing. With all the carbon dioxide being emitted by the industrialized world, the atmosphere is letting it escape. It's having no impact on our weather. Al Gore is a liar, and he's a nutcase. Now, this is the third treaty. It's called the Biological Diversity Treaty, and you see the red areas here. These are off limits to humans. And this was almost ratified. It's being implemented anyway. It's being implemented under Agenda 21, and you'll see how that's happening in just a moment. But the plan on this is to rewild America. So in Florida, for example, when Jeb Bush was the governor, he was rewilding the Everglades by destroying homes in order to reflood the Everglades. That's called rewilding. They also are in some of our states where there's a lot of federal land. And thank God in Texas there's not a whole lot of federal land unless it's a military base. And by golly, I hope that they start letting them carry their guns while they're on the base. But anyway, in many of those states, they are not even allowing ranchers to graze their cattle. Why? Because it's got to be rewilded. They're also rewilding by releasing wolves and bears into the habitat. They're not in our habitat because the farmers and ranchers got rid of them because they're predators. And yet we are just going about as though we can rewild America. Folks, you only need to take a short plane ride to look down and see that we, the people, could all in this world live in the state of Texas. And we could all live in a pretty good-sized home. We're not overpopulated. It's part of their lives. And they've been around since the 60s with Paul Ehrlich, who said that we're going to have a population bomb, and we've got to have zero population growth. Yeah, where's that being implemented? By the Chicons. Why? Because they only want as many people as they can use and abuse. Put under the iron fist of communism. That's the goal that they're talking about. That's why they talk about it. The United Nations is right now saying, ooh, we're almost to 7 billion people. How do they know that? They don't know how many people are on this earth. Other than America, not too many countries really do that good of a job of census. I'm not even certain we do that good of a job, but anyway. Now they say they're going to be 7 billion people, and we're just going to run out of resources. And unless we start limiting the number of people and the amount of resources and the amount of consumption that people can have, then we're all going to be living in stark conditions. You know what? Our children are being taught this in the schools, and they're believing it, and they're afraid. And I have too many grandparents who come to me and say, my grandchildren are afraid. Yeah, they think Grandma and Grandpa are going to take the food from them today so that they aren't going to have anything to eat when they grow up. That is cruel. That is cruel. And yet that is what our children are being taught in many of our schools. Well, you have the 3 treaties. The one dealing with deserts, the one dealing with climate change, the one dealing with biodiversity, rewilding America and the world. And then you had a soft law document called Agenda 21 that came out of the same UN meeting in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, called Agenda 21. Soft law. What is the difference between a treaty and soft law? Soft law does not have to be ratified by the US Senate. A treaty does. Not that it matters much when you get doofuses elected, that we've got to hold to account. That's why it's so important who we replace Kay Hutchison with. So important. And holding John Cornyn to account as well. But anyway, the Agenda 21 is a 300-page, 40-chapter blueprint for implementing sustainable development. You can say sustainable development, or you can say Agenda 21, it's the same thing. It's a blueprint for sustainable development. Now, how is it being implemented in the United States? The Biodiversity Treaty, the Climate Change Treaty, as well as the decertification, through the President's Council on Sustainable Development, that was an executive order issued by none other than Bill Clinton. The wagging finger liar. Well, when he signed this executive order to implement sustainable development, there were a lot of things that happened as a result, and we're going to go through some of those things now. The focus is on economic, environmental, equity goals, using Agenda 21 as their Bible. Again, the three parts of sustainable development, or equity: environment, social, economic. Those are the three entities that have to be equalized. It's just another approach. It's green on the outside and Marxist red on the inside. That's why Mikhail Gorbachev founded the Green Cross International. Like Red Cross, he founded Green Cross. There were 16 points in a We Believe statement concerning the President's Council on Sustainable Development. And most of it's in this room when it's not a law of the land, it doesn't go through our Congress. Why do we care what they believe, right? Well, this is when we started rewriting our form of government using this with a collaborative decision-making process. That is what it's called. That is the way that the United Nations works. It does not vote up or down different treaties or ideas. Instead, they just remove the opposition by singling out the opposition. We'll see that in just a moment. But it's called a collaborative decision-making process. It's top-down. There's a pre-drawn conclusion. And what the process does is eliminate vocal opposition and implement a foredrawn conclusion. It is a top-down, where we as Americans are used to a bottom-up, we the people, we are in control. And if our elected officials don't listen to us, then we have an option at the next election to replace them, right? But that's not what the collaborative decision-making process is. It's top-down. They have integrated policies to achieve their national goals. They talk about human population, and we've, I think, explained that enough. They talk about interdependence, and I really get upset when I hear that word, but interdependence of what? Economic prosperity, environmental quality, and social equity. In other words, social justice, economic justice, environmental justice. Marxism. That's what it's all about, Marxism. Here is how the collaborative decision-making process works. The democratic process, you elect officials and then you hold them to account. The consensus process, or the collaborative decision-making process, there's no choice in who represents you. Voting is not allowed. As a matter of fact, you talk to most Europeans today and they're very unhappy with the EU. Not only because the euro is now bankrupt, and Germany's not going to be able to continue to bail out all of these countries, and the Germans just keep working harder. But you know what? Over 80% of their laws are coming out of Brussels, Belgium, from bureaucrats that they don't even elect. And they're being imposed in their once sovereign nations. That's what's going on in the EU. Not just economic bankruptcy, but is going bankrupt in every way. Their independence, their national sovereignty is being depleted. There is no agreement, but there's an absence of expressed opposition. That's what a collaborative decision-making process does. There's no argument or debate, and it's spread by grants to every community. So the federal government or the state government, once their will done, they say, oh, you want to replace those leaking septic tanks? Then apply to the federal government. Oh, you want to build those roads? Then apply to the federal government. So you get the federal government loan. The federal government then sends you money with all these strings attached. Like in Hays County, Texas, just south of Austin, Travis County, the county commissioners indeed wanted to replace leaking septic tanks. They had a very worthy and honorable reason why they were seeking a federal grant. And then the feds come down and they say, well, there's a river running through Hays County, and there are cattle grazing along that river. And those cattle do the methane gas explosion, and they're dirtying, soiling the water in that watershed, and that's going then into that river and soiling the river. And so, no, you're not going to be able to graze cattle anymore along that river. At that point, the county commissioners woke up. They smelled the coffee. They knew that there was a rat on the ship, and they got rid of him. Right now, there is a gentleman, a county commissioner the other evening in another county I was speaking at, and he asked a very wise question. He said, you know, I've already called the feds, and they've already told me that I can get a grant for road building. We don't have the employees in our county. We don't have the money to build the roads that we need for our growth. So I can get this grant from the feds, but from what you're saying to me, this could end up bringing strings that we don't want. And I encouraged him to go ahead and apply for that money. And then when those strings come, shine a great big fat light on it and mock the feds. And let the people know what the feds are doing. Let me give you an example of what I did a few years ago on the Human Service Commission for the City of Dallas. I had so much fun with this. The chairman of our commission wanted the City of Dallas to have a marking on our city stationery that said, Dallas is a healthy city. I don't give a darn if they have that label or that little sticker on a piece of stationery. I care that our citizens are healthy, or that they have what they need in order to have, you know, clean water and sewage and that kind of thing. That's what his responsibility should be, not having something on a piece of stationery. So I began asking questions. Who grants the status of healthy city? What does that mean? What other requirements come with that recognition? How much is it going to cost? Who's going to have to pay for it? And this guy got so frustrated with me. He said, all right, Cathy, we're starting an ad hoc committee and you're chairing it. So then I came back every month to our meetings and I kept telling him more about the World Health Organization that gives cities healthy city status, and kept telling them all the bad things about it. And eventually they just backed off and they said, oh, excuse me, we don't want to be a healthy city. Yes, we do. We want to be a healthy city, but we don't need the World Health Organization to tell us that we are one. The difference between a collaborative decision-making process and the democratic process. Don't confuse that with the Democrat Party, please. All right, now here's one of their handbooks. It is the American Planning Association put together, as you see, almost 1,500 pages of how to implement smart growth. That's what they call it, Agenda 21. Using Agenda 21 as their Bible, they're using this book, and that's what they're implementing. In the city of Arlington, Texas recently, there was a city council meeting, and I felt so sorry for the citizens. They did their due diligence. They turned out at the meeting, and they testified. And the gavel went down, and they said, you can't, no more testimonies. We're out of time for testimonies. But the people were going to the microphone before their time was up, and they were saying simple things like, we don't want a bike path down our street. As a matter of fact, I've gone to every neighbor, and there are only 4 I couldn't get a hold of, but all the others said, we don't want a bike path down our street. You see, bike paths, walking paths, you know, hiking paths, bike trails, that kind of thing. That's part of Agenda 21. It's all being implemented top down. And you see, a lot of county commissioners might be, or city council members at the local level might be contacted by a UN organization, a UN-funded organization. They're called non-governmental organizations. And they're very busy in our communities. And they're very well funded. And volunteers like me, who live on my husband's dime, don't quite have the opportunities that they have. But they come and they offer free computer programs to these elected officials, and they say, you see how you're going to get reelected is if you put in this bike path and you put in that and you put in the other thing, the people are going to love you and you'll be lifted up and the people will reelect you. But no, that's not the way it's happening. The people are saying, we don't want this stuff. And they're saying, you're going to get it anyway. Get it. No more discussion. And that's what's happening in Arlington, Texas. And the people are going to go out to the next election. They're recruiting candidates now, and they're going to replace some of those guys, and they're getting what they're asking for. But yes, very brave people doing that. The common theme is government control of land use with no regard for private property rights. And if you look at Marxism, and again, this is the new Marxist agenda. It's green on the outside, red on the inside. Red, Marxist red. you will find that property rights is the #1 goal to get rid of in Marxism. Now, some of us, my hair would be gray, except that I have this wonderful hairdresser. But anyway, most of us who are gray hairs understand when we were fighting communism. We're not asleep at the wheel, but the next generation thinks it's dead. That wall went down, and they don't understand what's happening to them. The United Nations also is the source of this idea of no property rights, and this came out of a preamble of a UN meeting in 1976 in Vancouver, British Columbia. And here's what it says: land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. There's your word. Public control of land use is therefore indispensable. So get rid of private property rights. That is the #1 thing that they are doing. And they're doing it using these different processes under the collaborative decision-making process. Totally foreign idea to us. We don't know how to work within this system because it's a top-down plan. And they're very well funded, and we are citizens. The only thing we can do is hold our elected officials to account and help them understand. 99% of your work when you leave this room is not to go and get upset with anybody, but to sit down with an elected official, take this booklet, share it with them, and help them understand how these kind of things are happening deceptively. There are 5 model statutes for planning and management of change. Most Americans, I hope, are waking up to what that word means now. But these are models for legislation and executive orders at the state level. Now, I do not know of any of these that have passed in the state, and certainly not executive orders. And being an energy-producing state, as Texas is, these kind of things are pretty much recognized and shot down in the state of Texas. I will tell you, though, that there was one elected official who wanted green jobs put into a bill. When I pointed it out 2 sessions ago to Governor Perry, he had already signed the bill, otherwise he would have vetoed it. He didn't see the green jobs in there, but I will tell you that Susan Combs wanted green jobs. Okay? As far as smart meters, anybody heard about smart meters recently? These are meters. I was just talking to a friend on my drive here today from Tyler, who happened to be home when the Encore came to put in a smart meter in her home. And she said, no, thank you, I do not want the smart meter. And now they are threatening to shut off her electricity. The problem with smart meters, many people who may have an insulin pump or a heart pacemaker, they can cause different health problems. There are also, and I can tell you that Chuck Norris is writing about this. If you go online, and he's now a syndicated columnist, if you find his writings, he's writing about that. This is not a black helicopter scenario. This is something that Chuck Norris is writing about, and he has scientific evidence to show that. The biggest concern I have is that it allows government surveillance and control of your electrical use within your home. You turn on the computer, they know it. You run the microwave, they know it. You have air conditioning going, they know it. And you know what? They can turn it off. And now with Barack Hussein Obama, remember when he was candidate Obama, he said, yeah, they'll be able to build coal-burning power plants, but they'll go bankrupt. I don't know why the American people didn't hear that. Well, now he's doing it. And you go over here in Titus County, not that far from y'all, and they're shutting down 2 plants, no more mining for coal either. Folks, this is devastating East Texas. And what about the energy use that we will need? What about those new economic plans that we may have in the future? New companies that may want to move to our areas and we don't have energy to provide. And you know what? Coal is burning clean. It's burning clean. But they think that the air that we breathe out is a pollutant. You know what, I'm almost convinced here that Barack Hussein Obama's air he breathes out probably is satanic sulfuric. So the Environmental Protection Agency is the one that he is using to do this. He's bankrupting our country. Folks, when I went to Poznan, Poland a few years ago to one of these climate change meetings, I got on a train and got into my little car, and a miracle happened, actually. I went into my little car, and there was no way I was moving my luggage up to the rack, but there was a man in there who did it. And then there was a girl there also. So the three of us had a nice conversation on our way to Poznan. And her father was an American, her mother was a Pole. And she was enamored by Barack Hussein Obama, who had just been elected. And she was telling me how wonderful it was that he was going to totally green America, get rid of all of our polluting, and turn America into the same kind of governments that other socialists are enjoying. That's why they all want to come to America. That's why they want to be all they can be. They want their kids to grow up to be all they can be. They have to escape the squalor that they came from. Well, anyway, they call this visioning and challenge grants that are coming down from the EPA. The EPA was given the right by the Supreme Court. We've got to do some fixing on that, folks. We get any more Kagans on that Supreme Court, we're in trouble. We cannot let Obama get one more Supreme Court judge. These people that he has put on there are not qualified. They believe that the Constitution is a living document. They're out to change it. We are going to be in major trouble. I fear for our country, and I fear for my five great-grandchildren if we let this guy get elected again. But what they're doing is they are using this visioning and these challenge grants, and he was going to even implement the Kyoto Protocol using the EPA. And that would have capped the amount of carbon dioxide emissions without us even ratifying the Kyoto Protocol, which, by the way, it concludes, it sunsets in 2012. So when we go up again to Rio de Janeiro in 2012, and by the way, most of these meetings are 2-week meetings, they're going back to Rio for 2 days. It's a done deal by the time we get there. Lord willing, and I have a ticket to go to Durban, South Africa this December for their great big meeting. Again, about 20,000 people will be there. That's when they're going to submit their global tax scheme. If that is approved, I fear for our country and our sovereignty, because I don't believe it's going to be there anymore. And I think the next thing that we better start looking at is NATO, but I won't get there right now. ICLEI. You can remember the acronym because it's icky. ICLEI. ICLEI is an International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. Now, what's wrong with a statement like that? How can something be international and local? I'll tell you how it can be. The United Nations saw these liberal dudes, very effective, going against the grain of the American people, implementing things by creating mischief in communities. And they called them in. The UNEP did, the United Nations Environmental Program, called them in from ICLEI and said, if we fund you, can you do this across the whole country? And that's what they're doing. They're implementing the President's Council of Sustainable Development using ICLEI, and ICLEI is the one offering our local officials these wonderful programs and coming up with all these grandiose schemes, whether they be bike trails or whatever. And let me tell you, a bike trail in Dallas, Texas is a place where women can't go unless they want to get shot or raped. I mean, this is insane. It's insane. Just because you have a bright bike trail doesn't mean that you're going to have calm and cool in your community. That's not the way it goes. It is the heart of man that is desperately wicked. It is not going to be an environment that changes him. It's going to be man who changes the environment. We've got this backwards, totally backwards. So ICLEI is the group that's doing this, and my goodness, they're giving stars to communities. Don't communities want to be a healthy city or a 5-star community? Of course they do. And then they can sell it with all the real estate. You go to places like Frisco, you go to places like Plano, folks, they're using all this stuff. And they're heap big into this kind of program. The big difference is you go to Plano, Texas, and you're going to have a tank for every so many acres. You're going to have so much green space. I mean, it is a morass of green agenda. But the people are buying into that when they buy the homes. They're going into it knowing that they're paying extra for those things. It's when you try to retrofit a community that you're running into big problems. I wouldn't want to live in Frisco, personally. I don't want to pay for all this crap. If I want a tank, I want it on my own farm. Leave me alone with all this stuff. So, here we go. The White House Rural Council, an idea from Barack Hussein Obama just this June, where he signed another executive order in order to control 16% of the American populace who are considered rural residents. You see, they can control those who are living in urban settings. They want us to get out of suburbs, they want us to live in high-rises so that they can rewild. But they got to go after these people on these farms and ranches. They're going to take them over. How's he going to do it? Well, he's got the Department of Treasury, that's controlling the money. Department of Defense, he's going to send the Army to the ranches? I mean, folks, buy all the ammo you can get. I know you got your guns. Department of Justice, the Interior, Commerce, Labor, Human Services, HUD, Transportation, Energy, all that's not it. More of them. Education, of course, they're going to brainwash our kids into thinking that this is good and healthy and sustainable development, and that's what we all need. Veterans Affairs, oh my goodness. Homeland Security, EPA, of course we know them. Federal Communications, yes, they're going to brainwash, even on the airwaves. But look, 25 different federal agencies that are implementing this Rural Council. Folks, if you take a step back and you look at what he's doing, he is creating a chaotic environment within America. And then he's going to the international level and signing off on these onerous things. His plan is to crumble us within so that we are on our knees before the United Nations. That is exactly what he is doing. And if he gets this global tax, I'm afraid. I truly am. Here's just an example how the Department of Interior was using grant money. And here's another thing that I should bring up at this point. He was using grant money in order to keep farmers and ranchers from using federal lands for grazing cattle. And we've already talked about that enough. Oh, there was something else I was going to say there, I forgot. It'll come back. So, let's end with what you can do, and there are 2 pages of what you can do. Of course, always be polite and respectful. We're going to do that because we're Texans, so that's not hard. But before going to elected officials, I really do recommend reading Sustainable Development or Sustainable Freedom, because that is the contrast. You're either going to have their sustainable development or sustainable freedom. I remember what it was. And that is what Ronald Reagan did when he got into the White House was he also issued an executive order. Because once this President's Council on Sustainable Development was signed as an executive order by Bill Clinton, the only way to get rid of it, now that it is in all these different bureaucracies, is what Ronald Reagan did. He used the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, to go into all these bureaucracies and to cut all the fat. We're going to have to ferret out the rats and get them off the ship. And that's the way we'll have to do it. So the next president, instead of being asked about these silly questions that they are being asked about, for the most part, running for president, we need to be asking them some very serious questions. How are you going to reverse the President's Council on Sustainable Development? These are very important questions to ask. What are you going to do about the global tax that the United Nations is set to ratify in December under a treaty that the United States has already ratified? Are you going to unratify the climate change treaty to get the US out? Or are you just going to dump the building in New York that is being totally renovated, state-of-the-art renovation, out of the US? Use it for some better purpose than the United Nations, because it doesn't produce peace, which is why it was originally created. It is rarely productive to mention the United Nations, and that's very unfortunate, because as you see, what I've tried to do tonight is to show you what little piece of the puzzle Agenda 21 is to the big picture. The big picture is global government. Agenda 21 is being implemented by changing our form of government from a democratic process to a collaborative decision-making process. So it is all coming down from the United Nations. But if you go into an elected official and you say, well, Agenda 21 is what you're working on and you're implementing, then you're going to have an elected official who will say something like, no, I adhere to the United States Constitution and it would be unconstitutional to take in any treaty from the UN, so I'm not doing that. Thank you very much. They're just going to be in denial. But focus on the protection of private property rights and free markets in development and implementation of any land use plan, because that's what they're trying to do. We're going to master plan this, and who is in control of the master plan? Again, in Frisco, Texas, the people bought into that plan. But you may not want that in Longview. Read your local proposal and find the links to Agenda 21 and the President's Council on Sustainable Development. And lastly, this is going to be your best of the two lists. Is the plan mandated by state law? As I say, I don't think that they are. Smart meters were put in by the PUC when Public Utility Commission, when electricity was deregulated. And so when that deregulation happened, none of us were aware of smart meters at the time. None of us thought that the government would be using a meter on our house to not only surveil what we were using in our homes, but also be able to control our use of electricity. None of us thought that that was what they were about at the time. Why is the plan being considered? And what you'll find there is that some nice person came to one elected official and made a very good sounding proposal and said, gee, look at how you can use this to get reelected. And they thought it was a fine idea, cleaning the environment, creating something that everybody can use. Maybe it's a park, a green space. And they didn't realize that these people were up to no good. They were out to take away property rights instead of creating a green area, simply. And how and why was the person or agency guiding the plan chosen? And again, you'll be able to connect the dot of the persons. In one county that was fighting this, they found that there was one very innocent, well-meaning elected official. And once they found that, and then found who had sold him the bill of goods, and they were able to backtrack on it. How will the plan be enforced? This is where it really gets tricky, folks. Because if this plan comes in, and it comes with all this enforcement, that's where your property rights go. You can own the property, but the government's going to tell you what you can and cannot do with it. Folks, you're not owning that property anymore, if that's the deal. How much will the implementation cost, and where will the funding be provided? Those are absolutely crucial, because there's going to be a cost associated with it, and when it starts showing up in dollar signs, especially in an economy like we have today, I think it's a very good reason and a big reason for us to stand up and say, halt. And elected officials, I think, will be very willing to work with us. But please go to your elected officials and reason with them, and I think that you'll end up sitting down at a table together and working together in order to get out of these things. Oftentimes you'll find that your community may be a member of ICLEI. And once you find that out, just say, well, quit paying your dues to ICLEI. We the people, with you, whom we've elected and will hold to account, will come up with how many green spaces we want We don't need ICLEI here directing our plans. We don't need a top-down. We are a government bottom-up. That's the difference between a collaborative decision-making process and a democracy. I'd love to hear your comments and questions. Do we have time for that? Yes, sir.
Get it out of committee? How do you get rid of the enforcement and that kind of thing? Because it seems to me that once they come in and they think they have the authority to enforce something, then you're, like you're saying, bringing the army or whatever they're going to do, let's say, to the farmers.
Yeah. So how do you get out of it?
Yeah,
I think that you have to go back to the source, find out who is bringing it to your community, and if they have ties to ICLEI or to Nature Conservancy or someone with an ulterior motive, then expose who they are and what they do. And then find out how much it costs and who has to pay for it. And the buck stops with the taxpayers. And your elected officials are going to be very, very sensitive to that if they are representing you well. And I venture to say that probably they are. I know David Simpson sure is. He's listening and he is doing an outstanding job in Austin. Yes, sir.
What do you know about the UN treaty with regards to weapons and guns?
Yes, the UN treaty regarding weapons and guns. The rumor out there, and if you go to the internet and put up Hillary Clinton plus gun control, you'll see that there's a rumor out there where she has signed a treaty. That is a rumor, but you have to be eternally vigilant. Barack Hussein Obama said that he wants to denuke the United States and the world. And he is reasoning with the United Nations on that now. Everything that Barack Hussein Obama is harbored in the United Nations. And he is a globalist. He is not a patriot. He hates our country. You know, everything that the United Nations stands for, robbing us of our sovereignty, robbing us of our American way of life. He is all of that. And so you have to remain eternally vigilant. But as far as gun control right now, that is not happening. They did try a treaty a few years ago, and John Lott, L-O-T-T, wrote an outstanding book about that, and I think he's one of the best writers on gun control. And being a CHL owner, I'm telling you, I'm watching that too. But I have not seen them be able to do that. First thing they're going after is denuking the globe. And then, just like with guns, if you try gun control, only the bad guys are going to have guns. You try denuking the globe, and only the bad guys are going to have the nukes. You know, I mean, this is so, it's just so common sense. But, you know, they're totally Marxist and unreasonable. They don't understand the Western way of thinking, which is that our hearts are desperately wicked beyond anything we can imagine or think. We know that from the Bible. That's what our whole Bible, our Judeo-Christian worldview is based on. Easterners do not think that way. Ban Ki-moon is a Buddhist, and he makes no bones about it. You ought to see the crap that he puts out in religious formats. He's pushing this, you know, love and peace, and, you know, if you meditate enough, you know, you're going to have peace. Oh, excuse me. I've watched these people in Japan on a tour on a Saturday during a UN meeting where they sit all pretzeled up and, you know, do funny things with their hands and their fingers, and they stare at rocks until the rocks, they see spirits get up and leap over the walls and brag about it. Folks, they are involved in demonic activity. That's what they're doing. But these people don't understand the Western thought at all. There's a right, there's a wrong. And we don't have to apologize to anybody for that. Yeah, no. So, I mean, we're going to have to kind of, you know, just get a spine and stand up. You know, and, you know, about 3 years ago, I was almost killed in a car accident. A drunk driver hit our car. My husband was driving, and we went over a 20-foot cliff, and we should have been killed. And then I had 13 broken ribs and a broken sternum, and my back was crushed. And the doctors were just like, I don't know how you're alive. I don't know how you're still able to walk, because God meant for me to keep walking. And for my spine, they had to put concrete in it. And those who knew me best said, that's all you needed, Cathy, was concrete in your spine. So get some concrete in your spine. If you can't do it, get it done. Yes, sir.
Yes, I would like to know, I know in Texas they're establishing a nuclear waste dump in West Texas.
Yeah.
What do you know about that, and how do they transport that nuclear waste to that dump?
Mm-hmm. I know that this is a big controversy, and they're also doing a lot of research. I'm not well researched on that topic, so I'll just tell you what I know. I know that that is true, that they are, I think it's over in the Alpine, Texas area, that they are putting...
Did you say Alpine?
I think so.
I understood it was west of Andrews.
Yeah, you're probably right. Well, the guy who was fighting it was a Democrat, actually, from Alpine.
Okay.
But anyway, and they put it miles down, and then it has a life of like hundreds of years. But they are now, with nuclear research, able to reburn much of that and reuse it. And so we're having less and less waste, but there is still waste in nuclear. But nuclear is an energy where it produces absolutely no carbon dioxide. And yet the greenies don't want that either. They really don't want us to have energy. And I was so sad. I was in Germany a few years ago, and nuclear scientists took us to a nuclear plant in order to show us through the plant so that we would become familiar with it, and I go as a press representative, and so they wanted us to write about it. And it was amazing, all the security measures. And of course, when you're talking German engineering, I'm pretty sold on German engineering. And they were totally safe. But the German government now has shut them down. And yet, the French produce about 80-some% of their energy using nukes, and where are the nuclear plants? Along the German border. I mean, it's just like, what are we doing here? They're cutting off their own future energy, and it's clean energy. And it can be very safe. The tsunami in Japan was a very, very strange event. And there's just no two ways about seeing that as something that was, when you have a tsunami, an earthquake, and the force of God's hand, the way that it was, there's just no way around that kind of accident. But that is a very untypical setting. So I'm not anti-nuke. I think it has to be safe. I don't think it has to be as expensive, but it's because of the EPA that it's expensive, etc. Did you have something you wanted to add to that? Because I didn't really, probably.
No, I didn't. I just read about it, how did they transport it on the highways, waste and everything?
I think it has to be on highways.
Ma'am?
Yeah, I think it has to be on highways. How are they transporting the nuclear waste? Yeah, there's dangers there, absolutely.
All right, Cathy, if we get a conservative president and a conservative Senate, can they back off all these treaties? Can they back off all this stuff? Can they firewall us from that? And
Yes.
Would it take 60 in the Senate to do that?
Yes, yes it would, because it's 2/3 requirement of the United States Senate in order to pass or get out of a treaty. International business is 2/3. And so, yes, if we do our jobs and exactly what you're talking about, this grassroots work, that's fabulous, fabulous. That's how we win elections, folks. And we have heads turning in this country, asking how in the world do these people turn out those voters? And can they do it again? That's how come the Tea Parties are under attack. And so keep being effective, ignore their stuff, and just keep doing the right thing, and you will defeat them. But yeah, we do have to have more in the Senate. We have to have 60 votes. And they cannot be Susan Collins and Olympia Snowe, two Republican women who act like Democrats. They cannot be. They're going to have to be Republicans, and we're going to have to hold them to account. I hope Maine does that. Yes, sir.
I just want to let you know that I'm running for the U.S. Senate as an independent, and after the meeting, if anyone wants to talk to me, I'll gladly spend as much time as you want talking to you.
Awesome. What is your name?
Robert Belt.
Robert Felt?
Belt, B-E-L-T.
Belt, like the belt. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. Other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to encourage people to get involved on a local level, and for instance, to go to your school board meetings. You don't even have to go to your own city's school board meetings. I mean, some of the smaller communities are struggling with having people go and stand up for what's going on. The board members don't know that you're not from that town, and it really doesn't matter. To go and be a watchdog, because for instance, this ARRA money, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 money that's being used to, as a carrot dangled in front of the schools to do these, to get bonds and loans for school improvements. Those have strings attached to them. Along with this race to the top stuff, they're going to be interconnected, and the next thing that you're going to see, besides right next to the academically recognized schools, Obama already has it set in place, the big banners that say Green Recognized School. Yes. And when you see a banner that says Green Recognized School, they've already, maybe unwittingly, because I actually tried to talk to the board members at my own school district about this in Kilgore, and because unfortunately that bond passed, and they're getting some of that ARRA money, and I tried to tell them that there are strings attached to that, and they just were in total denial, complete denial. So I really, before those kinds of things happen, go to your school board meetings. And even if you don't have kids in school, this affects you.
Well, and also with what Obama is out there saying, even today, he had his whole cabinet around the table, had the press come in with the cabinet there, and is telling them that, telling the press that we have got to pass his jobs bill so that we can build schools and roads and all this kind of thing. You're exactly right. This is how he's implementing the green agenda. And they're going to be everything green. And the EPA is out now to control and limit farm dust, coal ash, cement. These are all things that they're anti. I mean, so what is he going to build roads with? He doesn't really want roads, as we've seen. They're rewilding and getting rid of roads. In California, where they're just head over heels into this stuff. I mean, you got Moonbeam as your governor, you can imagine. But then you have Schwarzenegger, not much better before him. And they're crazy. They're totally bankrupting their country, or their state, and they want us to bail them out as they keep going deeper in debt with all of these notions that are unworkable. I will tell you folks, the only way that green energy works is with federal subsidies. As soon as you remove the money from the windmills, the money from the solar panels, it doesn't economically pan out. And why are we doing it anyway when burning clean coal, burning natural gas is fine? Because they want to limit our standard of living, take us down to the third world. They believe that the only way that the third world can elevate themselves is by America being taken down. We look at them and say, you get rid of the corruption in Mexico, and those Mexicans are going to stay in Mexico because they're going to have jobs there. But the corruption is the problem. And as long as we keep allowing all of this stuff to come to our country, we're being brought down. But California is going to fall off the cliff, I think. I mean, I just don't know how in the world they're going to, and if you look even at what the Congress has passed laws that how many miles per hour you have to have cars by 2020 or whatever. There's no way that our auto companies can build cars that get that kind of mileage, unless you've got a plastic car with absolutely no safety. And I can tell you, with the kind of accident I had, I would have been dead. You know, I believe in putting a little metal around you. Anyway, are we done? Oh, thank you, God bless you. Thank you for coming out tonight and for all the work you're doing in the community.
Thank you, Cathy. Last thing before we leave, if you feel so moved that you want to be signing up for our Walk a Neighborhood or make phone calls for candidates, everything that we've talked about comes down to one thing. We've got to be involved. We've got to do something. We jump up and down. Everybody's mad. It doesn't get anything done. We have to be active. This is part. If you would get it, there's pens on the outside. If you want to fill that out, I'll be at the door. We'll just have a little box. You can collect these things and just sign you up. It's easy. It's convenient. And if you want to make a difference, this is how you do it. Please tell your friends. Encourage them to do something like this. Come to our meetings. We need to be involved. Okay. Thank you for coming.